Okay, so let's dive into this. We've got a really interesting source today. Just one, actually. It's a sermon.
Delivered by Pastor Sung No at Praise Presbyterian Church.
Right. And the focus is 1 Corinthians 11, verses 17 to 34, all about the Lord's Supper, or communion.
But here's the hook, really. This sermon, it was given right before this huge church festival, an outdoor thing, a big communal meal called 찬양합니다.
Yeah, that's what struck me too. You have this, solemn service communion, which we usually think of as quiet, maybe a bit somber.
With white gloves and black ties, almost a funeral atmosphere sometimes.
Exactly. And then you pivot immediately to this big, joyful outdoor feast. Why talk about solemn communion right before that?
Well, and this is maybe the first big takeaway from the sermon of the surprise connection, is that historically, the early church's communion was the joyous communal meal.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't the quiet, individualistic ritual we often see. It was more like a potluck feast. Think laughter, shared food, community. That was the original setting.
So our modern somber version is actually the historical outlier.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah.
Which makes the Corinthian problem even more, well, jarring.
Okay, let's get into that. Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he's not happy. He says in verse 17, basically, your meetings do more harm than good.
Yeah. Strong words. He says, I have no praise for you. Why? Because their communal meal, their Lord's Supper, was actually causing deep divisions.
And the sermon breaks down the specifics.
It does. Paul points out in verse 21, people were showing up and eating their own supper first. So picture this. The wealthier members arrived. Maybe they brought, really nice food and wine.
This sermon even used an example like someone bringing lobster.
Exactly. An extravagant example to make the point. They'd eat their fancy meal before the poorer members, maybe slaves who finished work late, even arrived.
Leaving them hungry.
Or shamed, maybe.
Both. Hungry and shame. Paul flat out asks them, do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? It was scandalous.
So it wasn't the Lord's Supper they were practicing anymore. It had become a selfish supper, a my supper, completely self-centered. They were physically together, but relationally miles apart, showing contempt for the very community the meal was supposed to build up.
Which leads us straight to that really critical phrase Paul uses later in verse 29, discerning the body. We often hear that and think, okay, Christ's physical body, the bread representing that. But the sermon and the text itself, if you look closely, point somewhere else.
Absolutely. The sermon emphasized, and there's strong scholarly support for this, even footnotes in some Bibles pointed out that the body here primarily means the church community, the gathered people.
So eating or drinking unworthily isn't about, having unconfessed sin, necessarily.
Not primarily, no. In this context, it's about failing to recognize and honor the other members of the body. It's about participating in the meal while ignoring or even causing the divisions and the hurt right there at the table.
You're dividing the very body you claim to be part of.
Precisely. You're failing to discern, to recognize, value, and treat as one the community that Christ's sacrifice created. Remember, Paul's whole point elsewhere is that in Christ, distinctions like rich-poor, Jew-Gentile, male-female are overcome. Their meal was reinforcing those distinctions.
Okay, so if the problem is this deep division, this failure to see the community, what's Paul's solution? Does he give them a 5-step plan?
It's actually much simpler and much more profound, I think. Verse 33. So then, my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, you should wait for one another.
Wait for one another. That's it.
That's the core command. Stop the rushing ahead. Stop the my own supper mentality. Wait. Ensure everyone is included, everyone shares, everyone belongs. It's about active inclusion.
And that's the connection Pastor Sung No made to the outdoor festival, the 찬양합니다.
Exactly. The festival becomes a kind of training ground for this principle. It's not just about having fun. It's about practicing heavenly unity. How do we structure this big meal so everyone feels welcome, so no one is shamed or hurt by what they brought or couldn't bring?
So practical application. The sermon actually gave them specific homework.
Yeah, homework for heaven, you could call it. Things like, make an effort, greet at least 10 people you don't know well, intentionally seek out anyone who looks lonely, and include them.
And caring for specific groups, too.
Right. Show special attention to children, the elderly, newcomers, maybe people visiting from other specific churches that were mentioned, like Emmaus Church or First Love Church. The focus in activities shouldn't be winning, but participation and fellowship.
It's about actively building that unity Paul was calling for, making the ideal real.
And the ultimate vision, the sermon suggested, is that these meals, whether it's the formal communion or a church picnic when done right, with this kind of love and inclusion, they become a foretaste, a preview of heaven.
A place with no divisions, no rich or poor distinctions, no loneliness.
Exactly. Where everyone belongs, everyone is cared for. These acts of waiting, sharing, including, they're not just nice things to do. They're tangible evidence of God's kingdom breaking into the present.
So bringing it home for you listening now, the sermon didn't just leave it there. It ended with this challenge, this idea of after service or AS.
Right. The idea that just hearing this, just gaining the knowledge, isn't enough. It needs follow-up. It requires action to make it stick.
So the question becomes, what's your AS? What's the immediate, maybe small but consistent action you can take based on this?
Yeah, if understanding this unity is like making a deposit, what's the action that acts as the guarantee? The sermon suggested it could be simple. Contact one person you met today. Or maybe start a small, regular act of service or hospitality.
Something tangible that turns the insight about discerning the body, about waiting for one another,
into a lived reality. That small, consistent effort, that's what builds the loving, unified community that reflects the heart of the Lord's Supper. It's the ongoing practice of heaven, starting now.